welcome to another episode of Simply Stated with me, Jennifer K. I'm filming in my car today. I'm actually on my way somewhere else, and I thought it would be nice to stop off with my travels and film in a car. Obviously, there's other days where I've gone ahead and filmed in the car just because it was the easiest thing. It's kind of a personal choice. I've had the option in the past of filming indoors and thought it would just be easier to go in my car simply because filming in the car is easier when nobody can really interrupt. I mean, if you're sometimes trying to film indoors, get a show done, like somebody might decide to come in the middle of the show and just interrupt for some reason. But anyway, so it's kind of fun today. A little traveling around in the morning, and so here we are. I mean, this is going to be episode 26, season 5. I hope you're all doing well wherever you're at. Hi, how are you? So, I was thinking this morning, and I mean, a lot of the point of the show is to discuss the issues with Labatt, CASA, Accenture, and Booz Allen Hamilton. As some of you know, for example, I've detailed that Kim Kardashian actually works for Booz Allen Hamilton, so does Gwen Stefani. The companies are specifically focused on projects for Russia and China. As far as popular context goes, or current events, I mean, I don't support, for example, the war with Iran and Israel, because I saw what it was as a big strip mining operation on behalf of those companies, by them, to strip mine Iran, and none of these supposed conflicts ever benefit the U.S. or the rest of the world. They always end up just leading to more problems, poverty, and chaos. The current Pope doesn't support the conflict, and it's unfortunate that we have a leader currently in the U.S. who doesn't really support the United States as a country. He's very much Russian. Donald Trump's Russian, and Melania has turned out to be as well, and she's from Slovenia or whatever. But I know from the years that I was labor trafficked to Endeavor Corp, which is a Russian company, based Russian. I mean, it's had other companies buy into it and take more control over it, but based out of Russia. Patrick Witzel and Ari Emanuel founded it, their old KGB. The point was to create all this obfuscation, and one of those is recently, there's been rhetoric that those of us who support war with Iran and these operations and support Israel are Nazis. And I'm actually Jewish, so I couldn't be more offended by any of it. But I've also been incredibly offended by Israel in the course of my life. My father was a Mizrahi Jew, and I've been a victim of trafficking in the U.S., and it's been because of Booz Allen Hamilton, Labatt, CIC, and Accenture. And there's no reason for me to support them going into another country and strip mining it and trafficking people and pretending to be great liberators or saviors when we know they're really not. If you want to do something about Iran and their behavior, do something about them in this country. But there's more than enough Iranians here and Persians that are out of control and part of the old KGB themselves. And we have out of control Russian GR units in the U.S. and what's called the FSB of Russia today that you could go after if you want to go after the problem. But, whatever this is, the Strait of Hormuz, it just doesn't make sense. Or is it Hamas, or whatever you want to call it today? It's just, did that even exist until recently, or is it just like a new made-up story? Because I worked in journalism as an actual journalist. We spent a lot of time verifying information and facts. I'm a published writer. And I can tell you, there's no shortage of trash journalism that isn't real journalism at all, and it's just some press release. Very hateful and aimed at the public to create obfuscation. So, I take time to make the show so people understand what's going on. There's no reason for anyone in this country to feel like they're a Nazi or a bad person because they don't want to support the war efforts or whatever this is, because it's not war. The strip mining operation with Booz Allen Hamilton, Labatt, CIA, and Accenture. You have a right to simply not support those operations because of the cost to the U.S. and to the cost of the American people. We're a country that's been made substantially more poor and been strip mined ourselves, and our own people have. I supposedly had a hoop system put on me so Booz Allen Hamilton could pay for all their needs, which also meant supporting Russian and Chinese activity in the U.S. And, literally so that the U.S. could go abroad and strip mine other countries, but it wasn't actually the U.S. government. It was Booz Allen Hamilton, Labatt, CIA, Accenture. So, it's important to understand where the labor trafficking comes from, what the actual conflict is for the U.S. government to fight, and for what other countries deal with. I can tell you recently, the dummy labor traffickers are at it again. They've been trying to get at people up here where I'm at in Michigan, and it's just kind of ridiculous because, they don't get it. Like, MI6 was already up here recently just to put some stuff together and was like, no, we're just not, the English and their configuration of countries is just simply not going to put up with it. And thank God, that there's an actual consortium of countries that, they call themselves a Commonwealth, that don't support this kind of behavior, that are more advanced technology-wise. But believe me, Russia and China with their fake front companies have been totally trying to go at the U.S. public and pick up people to traffic to pay for the Israeli-Iranian conflict. And, the invented conflict, which is just a strip mining operation on 37 trillion in resources and minerals out of Iran. Here's the other reality. I recently saw Matt Damon, who was out of St. Joseph's in Dubuque, which is a cult group that's actually the cult of ISIS. And, he could have been more angry and probably pissed off at the Pope as well, because the Pope doesn't support it. But then you're not really part of the Catholic Church. St. Joseph's was found to be a cult and part of the cult of ISIS and not Catholic a long time ago. Knowing those organizations exist in the U.S., that they run fronts and they pretend to be Christian or even Catholic, and that they're not Christian or Catholic, or that they also run front groups and pretend to be Jewish or even Muslim, is important to know. Knowing what's an actual religious organization versus a front group is important. There's no bigger issue. And then they run their own militias in the U.S. too. So, as far as seeing Matt again, it's just, nothing's more creepy or weird than seeing Matt Damon in one of his idiot costumes. Every time I see him, he always looks sort of Russian or Chinese. He's always got the same bad attitude, hateful of this country because he's from Russia originally, and he was trained through the old programs, to want to create anarchy and to destroy the country. And so when you look at, what's come out, Patrick Witzel and all those guys created reality TV and trash culture. What is trash culture? Because, what you see, for example, like we detailed this in previous episodes, like Kim Kardashian, when she hung out in Janesville, used to live in a really nasty trailer park, and all of her stuff always just looked really trashy, and she had a lot of money. She has multiple homes all over the U.S., but, she'll suck up housing that other people need, and that's been the biggest problem, I would say, with Russian and Chinese activity in the U.S., is they suck up multiple homes and even squat in them, and they won't let the rest of us who are actual U.S. citizens who actually work in this country, need to here, have housing, because their main goal is to create conflict and anarchy and to destroy the country. And so it's really important to, recognize all this, take all of this in, and then say, what am I going to do with this next? Like, what means something to me in all of it? Because the rest of us have a right to housing and to be able to afford housing. And the U.S. government also needs to do something about the recorded acts and the abuse of women. It's important to, there's no lack of housing in this country. I can tell you from living in Arlington County and serving on boards there around Washington, D.C. I lived there for a 20-year period, about 19 years, and 2 years down in Charlottesville by National Ground Control. No shortage of housing. The problem was always Russian and Chinese activity with wanting to squat in these homes and not being willing to rent them out to people and use them to rent intel for their buildings. And so it's important to understand all these different sort of concepts, fair housing. It turned out to be a label to throw away the term, and then you could send a radio signal to say, well, it's just poor people complaining. No, this is actually people in this country saying, hey, we get paid, we work. Why are we not allowed to afford our own housing? Why is my own government letting these dorks shit and squat in homes they don't need and destroy our opportunities to have housing? And the reality is the U.S. government actually has no right to refuse to not work on the issue. And obviously certain parts of the country work on it better than others because all government in the U.S. breaks down regionally, like by county, city, state, they've got your federal. Obviously the federal does the least, like they usually are the worst. And it's important to recognize all of that. But you say, what is trash culture? You can have a place that's very, very nice and new and everything's really fresh and clean and it's still trashy. You can also have a place that's older and it's been put together artfully and it's clean and it's not trashy at all. And so what you're seeing with Patrick Witzel and his stuff that he presented through these reality shows, and it's coming out of Endeavor Corp, and it's still presented. I mean, they're still trying to present trash culture. The U.S. reconfigured itself for the past 20, 30 years, so it doesn't work as well anymore. You know, Endeavor Corp is no longer, the Russian faction of it is no longer as powerful as they once were. But, you know, you have to look at everything in context and recognize that there's a larger issue there with, you know, even style, and knowing that, you know, a place can be very trashy and everything is new and shiny and fresh, and that's the epitome of it being trashy somehow. That it still looks like trash. It doesn't matter how cleaned up it is, it doesn't matter how sparkly it is, it's still trash. And, you know, that's what I always saw about Kim throughout her whole life. She's gone by the name Alicia Carlin. Ocious is one of her aliases. You know, really trashy person, was on the Parker Palms team in Janesville, Wisconsin in the 90s. Spent a huge amount of time setting up the death of Crystal Eggy, who was a star performer and Palms dancer who had made a plan to productively move on with her life and become a probation officer and work for the U.S. government, and was going to be a really talented, sympathetic, and just probation officer. You know, so you need context to be tied into whether or not it's important to know what's trashy and what's not. That's what you need to know. Because how many of you would, like, you know, love to have a nice, kindly probation officer who did things right and actually followed the justice system? And this person was killed, and it was killed because of Kim Kardashian setups in Janesville, Wisconsin in the 90s. Of course, you would be being raped in public. Maybe you don't really care about that, but I think a lot of you would care about getting good cops in, getting good police into the system who are intelligent and compassionate and strong. And unfortunately, Endeavor Corp, because of its Russian relationships and working for Putin, basically, has spent a huge amount of time putting in corrupt cops, which have to be constantly ferreted out of the system and thrown out. So you're wondering where they come from. It's from Russian and Chinese activity. You know, so we're going to get into the rest of the show today. I've got some really weird notes to share. I guess I'm supposed to put in a reminder that I did see Ben Affleck last year in Traverse City. And went through some mediated talks, which I really didn't expect to have to do. But, you know, he was explained why he'd been fired from Project with J-Lo, because he wasn't doing his job. And he had basically tried to seize the work and then just refused to deliver, so he was fired. It's also important to know that, you know, Ben was actually a victim of rape himself, as well as Ted Corey. He went by the name Ted Corey, the guy that killed my mom. His brother could have killed my mom, and he had Wilhelm, went by the Wilhelm, and also he called himself Yuri back in Russia. Both those guys were actually victims of rape, and I think what was always kind of ridiculous about the whole situation is that both of them, in their work for the old KGB, called FSB of Russia Today, you know, really sold out a lot of women and kids just because they didn't want to be raped again, and the rest of us were going it all the time. And, you know, it makes those shows to put it in context for people, because I have absolutely, you know, no problem telling people you've been a victim of rape if you're going to, like, constantly throw the rest of us out there to be raped and beaten who aren't from your weirdo, like, I'm not here to support the government of Russia and China, you know, and tell us we have to go through all this stuff and then don't care about our survival or even getting compensated for our work. You know, sometimes you just have to, you know, anyone needs to make a show that's a wake-up call on that issue so people could recognize the reality there. But, I mean, Wilhelm and Ben have both definitely been raped, sodomized by the old KGB in this country. And, you know, I think we can label it and try to, you know, euphemize it and say, oh, you know, male rape, it's so terrible and we got to do something about it. But the reality is that, you know, there has to be a larger understanding that these guys really did throw the rest of us under the bus on the issue because they wanted to continue living their housing and squatting in homes, and they wanted to continue the bizarre obfuscation campaigns on behalf of Russia because they came out of that old Russian system, the old program system, you know, and today it's called corporatism in the US. But, you know, so never ever forget that. But, I mean, expecting sympathy for the rest of us or even to protect you, I'm not going to do that. I got my own life to live. I'm poor. I have to work a couple of jobs and I barely survive in this country because of the damages that have been done to it in my own life. I'm somebody who would have been happy to work as a medical doctor and was denied the right to do that. And then I tried to go to nursing school and that was ruined as well by these stupid organizations coming out of the old Russian FSB. And, these companies, Booz Allen Hamilton, spent a huge amount of time just trying to screw up my life. And unfortunately, your current president was one of the people who's benefited from that and created extortion schemes for people to have to go to schools, private schools, and ended up, literally extorted money from me. He had a strong relationship with Wilhelm and Circe, and the couple that labor trafficked me, and then I had to get the protective order against it took forever. To go to Georgetown, so Georgetown could just get a bunch of money and blow it out their ass. And then the school demanded that I go back to work and go back to being trafficked. Go back to working for free. So why would I be grateful to anyone at this point with that much taken from me? Like, there's no reason. I'm someone who had happily worked as a nurse or a doctor. And those opportunities were literally ruined by these. And it was investigated very thoroughly by the U.S. government, by other countries, the English, South Korea. Everyone's got involved in, this national issue of labor trafficking. And it was very obvious that they ruined those opportunities for me. And it was all, not those countries, but I mean that the old KGB, using Booz Allen Hamilton, Labotier, Accenture, their security groups that they had set up, ruined those opportunities for me at the direction of the Russian FSB. And it's important to understand that that's actually going on in this country. If you are going to schooling, getting into schooling, do you want advanced schooling? I don't know. I don't know if you want it or not. I guess it depends on where you have the opportunity to go. Could you go to a reasonable school? I eventually went to UVA and got my certification in public relations, which helped me a lot, and I really needed that. And I also went to a tough program. It only had a 10% acceptance rate. And everyone definitely didn't finish the program. So, only 50% finished. So you have like a 5% acceptance and completion rate for that program in the country. So, went to an Ivy League school, got that education, which has incredibly informed my life and helped me to figure out how to handle things in the world of business. There's also the reality, of course, that I have my medical studies degree from Nova, which is one of the most diverse and well-known community colleges in the country down in Alexandria, Virginia, and it has a couple other sites out at Annandale and around the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So I did make it to some really good schools eventually, but, I wasn't able to finish up again with those technical degrees, and it was because of interference in Virginia from those companies that are Russian and FSB and Chinese CCP. So what you have is Russian FSB, Chinese CCP direct activity here in the U.S. and trash culture, that they don't want people to be nurses or doctors interfering with our health system. And, I definitely worked with and had a clearance from HHS Intel, and probably could still get another one if I needed to. But it's so important to understand, this is the issue that's actually the most paramount in the U.S. It's actually getting control of those groups. And if you've ever been down in D.C., the Washington, D.C. area, you'll see how hard it is, because too often people end up, actually, I don't know how to describe it. They end up sending out a lot of signals, a lot of radio signals, and attacking individuals that work in the government who have power to make changes. And so there has to be a constant process of trying to protect actual employees and then the rest of us who've been victims, and protect our brains so that we can function properly and not be abused. And not end up being trafficked again, and stay focused on what the actual goal is and what actually needs to be accomplished. So, I need to note for you that I saw Mary Catherine Ham recently. I had been asked a long time ago, like 7 or 8 years ago, if she was Pia Witzel. Having seen her again, I'm 100% convinced that this is Mary Catherine Ham, who had her husband killed. Bizarrely, the idea for how to kill her husband, who worked for the Sunlight Foundation, came from the movie Practical Magic, that Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock were in. It was the part with the guy going out in the bicycle race. The first husband of the Sandra Bullock character goes on the bicycle race and he gets hit. Like, all these bicyclists come around and he gets hit by a truck. It's pretty much the exact same way Mary Catherine Ham's former husband was killed. Where the kids came from, I don't know. I don't believe she was ever pregnant with him, but it's pretty obvious, having seen her again, that she's actually married to Patrick Witzel now. So she's the one that's actually posing as the wife. The pictures of him and who he's supposed to be with are just 100% photoshopped and totally weird. I don't like her. She was down in West Branch at one point over the winter, and I just expected me to be impressed or happy to see her. I was like, no, I don't freaking want to see you. You're another dork that worked with my ex, not ex, Chris Evans, and you're part of a terrorist group out of Russia, which is all the Heritage Foundation turned out to be, and Nazi groups, and I just no. I don't really want to see you or hear from you. I'm not impressed by you. I'm weirded out when you're around. But yeah, she's definitely the one that went in and got married to Patrick. And that would make sense because she was part of the Peace USA and heavily praised by Caroline Silver, who ran her company group, whatever. And they always were trying to look for the next cult wife. Before I even left DC, the government was trying to figure who the next cult wife was going to be. Or the real wife, not like Lauren Sanchez was definitely his second wife. Feel like going and talking about the first wife anymore, Megyn Kelly. But I mean, that's the point. Like, he's always had these wives careers, and they were always Russian or tied. Or Larry Sanchez is actually a dude, is the Khmer Rouge of Cambodia. So, always from some weird Bolshevik group. Anyway, so the other issue I saw up here was just kind of weird. I wish I had more time to cover stuff, but I'm busy with the rest of my life. It's always important to keep in mind the issues of ritualistic abuse and what that is, especially in healthcare. Like, I, had to go through a couple appointments and reporting some people because I was literally, like, if you go to a healthcare practitioner, a doctor, PA, or MP, and they're saying to you as a female that you have to be injured somehow in order to have a treatment, like, you have to be stuck with, a swab too hard in your uterus or something, or, you have to have the wrong sized, for example, you were in the middle of a gyno procedure and they can't be bothered to use the right size speculum or tools for you and they're too big and they expect you to just grin and bear it. Like, that's ritualistic abuse. I saw the most of PCUSA, I also saw the EDCLA, but it's when they tell you that because something good happened to you or in order for you to receive something, you have to be hurt somehow or take a loss. That's ritualistic abuse. So it's important to know it and spot it because I recently came in contact with some crazy practitioner that was mad because one of her coworkers had given me a treatment at one of the clinics up here and tried to force me to go into a position, like I would get up on the examination table and be abused. I just would know and left. It was kind of hilarious because this person was pretending to be an MP and it obviously really wasn't. And it was still literally just talking to itself as I walked out of the room. Like, it didn't even expect that I would just get up and leave. And that's really the point. The shows are about how does this play out in regular life? Like, how does it play out in the healthcare world and in the rest of your life? And to know that it isn't okay for someone to think you have to be hurt. Your toilet doesn't need to be blown up. You don't need to be injured because something good happened to you. To know that the mafias, that the Russian mafia, for example, the Russian FSB, the Chinese CCP are very much hateful towards Americans and are going to be hateful and mean to you about your life. That's important. That hate groups function that way is important to know. But to think you deserve it or have to have it, no, you really don't. When I was younger, I used to talk backwards and say, well, I had this, so that happened. And unfortunately, if I was dealing with somebody from one of these really nasty, ritualistic groups, they would say that was like permission for them to then be more abusive to me, and it wasn't. I was just explaining the way that these groups worked and what was happening. So, again, knowing all of this, like, sometimes I think I should just call the shows like, I'm not in your cult. I'm not in your cult. I'm not in your 12-step group. I'm not in your cult. Just not in it, and to address the issue of the fact that the actual recorded acts of violence that have been put together by the Chinese CCP and the Russian FSB and then played out by the gangs, MS-13, you're all Jalisco, you're all trying to Nicaragua, they literally keep the good police in this country busy all the time, trying to control, and they're just totally weird. Some of you may have seen some footage of it, out there, but, I mean, I know there's some famous footage that went out of a cop, like, watching, like, literal trash, like, spewing out for no reason from a trash can, and it was because... And there was a woman like this at Luther College, literally wrote up a code to make it so trash wouldn't go where it was supposed to, and everything was just, like, throw out. And, you literally try to throw trash into a trash can, it pops back out of it. She's working for the Russian FSB. She's also in her life posed as a black woman, and she's actually Russian. So, it's important to know these people around. This person is still at large. That one's had multiple names, but I mean, I know when it was over, I mean, we did multiple reports on it when it was at Georgetown and got fired from there, but that's not enough. Like, that's something like that, actually needs to be apprehended and put in prison. Um, I know I did recently write to Julia Louise Dreyfus, so she's definitely from the old terrorist group out of Iowa. She was formerly on Seinfeld, and they said she looked like a bug. You think, what is going on in Jerry Seinfeld's life? That I mean, Seinfeld's a weird show because in a sense it was ahead of its time and behind. It was very much a classical theater style. But what I saw with the show was that a lot of people featured on it seemed to have been created by the Russian FSB or Chinese CCP in the militaries and were fairly difficult. And it's important to say all that because I mean, the Julia Louise Dreyfus character was a bug, basically. And I've seen her again in real life. This is the one that used to send weird messages to me and tell me to say stuff to people that was really offensive, like through the old CAA system when I was a child actor. So it's really gross and abusing kids and trying to set them up to be abused. And really, really lies. Says that she's a Jew, but I caught her up here going to one of the extremist cult Christian groups that's into ritualistic abuse and abuses kids. I didn't bother to check if it was the PCUSA or if it was mother groups that John Sly runs, but definitely, into that. And sending military signals around and wanting to make everything nice for herself and selfish, very greedy, and doesn't want anyone else to have anything. And that's the kind of person that's been featured prominently at the Emmys and Golden Globes. Like, ugh, it's not somebody you want to be around. So it's sort of gross. But anyways, and then, let's see. I mean, for those of you who want to this is a weird one. I found Allison Elliott finally up here, who originally she was the woman that tried to pretend she was in Wyatt Earp. I did her job. They put her face on mine. She didn't act it. She never paid for the work. I ran her at the women's shelter up here. So because I played the lead role in that, I played two of them actually, and she is just an incredibly nasty Iranian. So there you go. Are you going to close that one up? I mean, we don't have to wonder if she was just confused or not anymore. She definitely was somebody who was part of the cult groups and believed in trafficking kids and thought she was just owed something for nothing. And, not a nice person. Still around up here looking for women to traffic and abuse and just not a good attitude. Managed to get her to stay away from me, but just, it's more to know that kind of person is actually still around. You think, why is the U.S. government letting them go free? Like, is it a lack of knowledge or do they just not have enough money to go after some of these groups? I don't know. Also, I ran to Amanda Burns up here. Or Bine. Is it Bine, B-Y-N-E? She's a really weird one in the sense that she's definitely into messing around with kids. So, it's actually a man. She tried to pretend like she was Jennifer Aniston sort of at one point in her career, and then, I don't know, her management's had her changed over to look more strange, but, Hollywood actress, definitely a man, and definitely a pedophile. And definitely ended up playing weird games with moms and kids. It's just really gross. So, didn't cross that one off. Also, I need to tell you that Doug Fleming was staying up at the Baymont Motel in Petoskey. There was a bunch of CCP and Russian FSB people there. And he decided to out himself to me. I was over there just looking at raids, but full of Russian FSB, Chinese CCP pretending to be journalists. I think the big thing to remember about Doug is that when he's not busy screwing up, pretending to be working for U.S. Border Patrol or whatever it is he's doing and getting people shot, is to remember that he's just a really nasty human trafficker and he's from Russia and he's Russian FSB. And he works for them to make messes all over the place and then the rest of the time poses as a journalist. And, not a legitimate journalist. So, so kind of a reminder here, close up the loop on Julia Louise Dreyfus. She's, likes to fight with people, is a psychopath, and, very gross, just really gross person. I also saw this recently. So I ran into the person that you would have known as Devin Woodhead at Luther College. That person actually was Johnny Galecki on Big Bang Theory, Right now, pretty much everybody else that I've run into thinks that that's also Caroline Silver, the one that went by the name Britain, and supposed to be running Silver Lake and has had a long history of trafficking kids. Um, I'm not even gonna bother to try to straighten that out. Like, if it's definitely a borderline. So I can see why other people wanted to stop with the setups that supposed Devin out of Luther College had put together. Definitely working in Russian intel, definitely working for the Russian GRU. If any of you ever wondered like where the weird series came, Big Bang shows came from in the late 2000s with making about the situation with one of the women that had slept with like Chris when I was supposed in my weird fake marriage to him and all that happened in the 2000 range. The reason they made the shows the way they did and put that referencing into his situation was because they're Russian GRU and they think it's fun. They think it's fun to be real weird. The newest thing I found is really weird is this is the strangest thing I've seen yet is Kim Kardashian is engaging in some overt elder abuse up here. The governor's office is not gonna be real crazy about that. They have their own commission that's against elder abuse here. And she's found a woman that's so similar to my mom. It was a woman that I know at Luther College. Of course, I was trafficked to the school, but obviously this woman was and got stuck. They've made her look really old, and Kim's just running around pretending that they have some kind of relationship or friendship. It doesn't seem good at all. Yeah, I'm like, oh, this person's dementia, and it looks older than it actually is. Like, it's probably a 40-year-old, and they may look like an 80-year-old. So overt elder abuse or human trafficking. It's either overt elder abuse or it's trafficking of somebody in their 40s. Remember the story with my mom was that they made her look a lot older than she was before she died. So it appeared to be an older woman. And, of course, my poor mom decided to stay in the PUSA and try to go through all those marriages. And of course, the last guy that was married to her ended up getting killed by the U.S. military eventually for what he'd done to her. But, I don't really feel like waiting for somebody else. So what? This person's going to die being trafficked and is being made to look like an 80-year-old and it's probably like 40. And Kim's going to make money off of it because it's a person that's fairly attractive, if you're going to play, because Kim's into the face game, white parties and weird shit. Likes to make people crazy, sitting around for GRU signals. And I have to also notice, she's definitely been caught skimming at major stores, Meijer, Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, Walgreens, like pretty much all the major stores in the area, even Dollar Tree. She's got herself dressed up, pretending to be like a really skanky hick person, doing a fake like insert on top, so half her teeth are gone. They're not. She's more than enough teeth, no enough money, and but she's been skimming at all the stores up in Petoskey. So it's like, where's TMZ uncovering some actual stories? But I decided to write off TMZ as being too Russian itself and covering too much of their stuff and not really knowing what they were doing or not being able to do it the right way. Mostly because the guy who found it seemed to have too many issues. I like him as a person, but I can't tell if he was someone that was too brainwashed by them or just didn't know how to do it. When I talked to TMZ about this all years ago, back in the 90s in Janesville, Wisconsin, they said, no, you're going to make up for all this stuff and get out of it and do your own show, and you're going to be really investigates it all and puts it together. So, here I am. By the way, interesting facts. I did meet Brooke Burke again, who I had known when I worked at Entertainment, like, in the 2000s, like, decades ago. And it was good to see her only... it was good to see her only in the sense that it gave me some clarity because I realized my analysis of her was correct, that she was a professional. We got along professionally and we had what's called affinity. When I was down in DC, of course, one of the investigators who was Russian from Rosalind Hamilton kept trying to say we were like great friends and, Patrick had to find Brooke and kill her and all this other weird crap, putting out weird threats as if like anybody even remotely related to the media in the US doesn't realize that the Russian FSB and Chinese CCP like literally want to kill them all the time. And of course we have to deal with the bullshit dichotomy of like Mary Catherine Ham being a huge communist and what would be euphemistically called a leftist in the U.S. media, thanks to the Bolsheviks, your communists, your human rights oppressors and traffickers. And I spit this all around for you because Mary Catherine got leveraged up to go work at CNN, claiming that CNN wanted to be more diverse and have somebody from the right, and said they just took another person who was another corporatist and a Bolshevik, and not needed. Um, and then you counter that with something like Brooke, and I see Brooke, and I realize that she's actually from the Filipino culture and not a Bolshevik at all, or a corporatist or a communist, as you would call them, and that I was correct about her, that she was simply somebody who just didn't believe in human trafficking, and wouldn't like or want to be around the Chinese CCP or Russia FSB, doesn't support their behaviors. And all I have to say on that note is that there was an awful lot of men from those groups that were tied to Hollywood, the Russian FSB and Chinese CCP, that were after her, like back to 2010s, and wanted to like get her for not supporting human trafficking, which is, it sounds really bizarre and sick, but that's the culture you're dealing with. There's a bunch of people that are totally entitled and have to be constantly managed because they think they have the right to abuse people, and they just simply don't. So, anyways, but as far as saying she was like my best friend or we were super close, I didn't know. I thought she was someone that was a professional like I am and that I had an affinity with for that reason, because I didn't support the old KGB and believe in being a consummate professional. And that's how she is with people too. So it's been good to see her again, to know that it's a question I never would have asked and didn't know I needed an answer to, but I can see it for myself. What I got out of it was that my analysis is always pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty good at analysis. And for those of you who think, gosh, this woman really should be on CNN or Fox, it's like, well, I'm not a corporatist. I'm not a corporatist, so why would I be on one of those networks? And as far as regular news, I mean, Katie Couric is a nasty, nasty Russian spy, and he was committing nothing but murdering attractive American women and abusing people, and that's like your mainstream media of the U.S. That's who's at NBC. If there ever was good journalists, good reporters who weren't Bolsheviks, it's been hard to tell because so much of the money comes from the Bolshevik groups to fund a lot of it. So if you're going to do your own projects, you're going to have to be self-funded, right? Or figure out some other way of doing it. E! Entertainment, when I was there, was not a communist organization, but they got taken over by Endeavor Corp, and everything turned communist over the years. Corporatism, what's called corporatism, on behalf of the Chinese CCP and Russian FSB. And so, of course, the quality of it was ruined. I don't even watch entertainment anymore. But the years when I was there were pretty great, right? So it was before they got taken over. So you all know the story about how they'd offered me a job and I couldn't go back out there to work. They were going to pay me $40K a year to be an assistant out there on their news site. It would have been pretty great, right? If I could have done it. But it also would have been something that would have ended by now anyways, is because, LA got ruined by the corporatists, the Bolsheviks, and Patrick's people, Ari's people, Endeavor Corp. There's also the Russian FSB, Chinese CCP, all the messes that Buzell and Hamilton, Labatt, CIC, and Accenture have made. And it's important to know that, because some people think, well, where would it have gone? Well, you got taken over by Endeavor Corp, so it would have lasted for me. Sort of like when I worked on Playboy last year. Like, it worked for me for a little bit, and then they got hacked and taken over by Endeavor Corp, and I don't know if the English have figured out how to fix it or if they're even going to bother. One thing I know about the English is that they're very big on just starting new stuff. And there's all kinds of other sites that, Hef's gone. There's all these other companies that have sprung up that are like OnlyFans, the same concept. And of course you have OnlyFans. So, there's always the upward and onward and just make new stuff and get away from the weirdos type attitude is one way of handling it. The English certainly like to do. So I don't know if that's why the English haven't decided to or what, but it's been pretty clearly taken over and seized, at least by Endeavor Corp, which is literally a bunch of Russian SSP, Chinese CC people, and they're putting a bunch of men on the site. So it's become a site for men, basically. And maybe even some images of people that aren't actually going to them. Like, I know mine was on there. There were some pictures of me from when I was like 16, 17 years old on it. I got them removed. And they were making money off of it. It was Caroline Silver who posted them. So it's kind of important to know what's going on. But to really, I wouldn't say take every thought hostage like this crazy woman from the Claim Bible used to tell me to do, but I would definitely challenge anyone who suggests that you simply have to accept something that's just totally offensive and rude, like being told that you're a Nazi and a horrible person because you don't want to support Labatt, CIC, and Accenture in strip mining Iran. And I mean, if they had put together operations or stuck with the operations like the rest of us, I worked on some of those operations and created them. Like if they had stuck with what I actually put together for them of the less expensive attacks to take out infrastructure so that the Iranian military didn't feel comfortable attacking us, that's legitimate. But, you know, a massive operation for the media to cover that's actually Russian and Chinese, like it's all about them and strip mining the country, that's not actually something that's really very acceptable. I just don't think it's acceptable. And there's no reason to ask other people to support it. It's ridiculous. You know, that's one of the reasons I left going to organize religious groups and organizations of any kind and 12-step groups. I was like, I don't want to be part of a bunch of weirdos that just want to strip mine and attack other people and steal from everyone. And they're their own members, right? And you don't want to be a part of that. So, anyways, I'm going to be signing off now. This has been a really interesting morning. It's a beautiful morning. Oh, I should show you what it's like outside. Hold on. So let's go ahead and look a little bit outside.